2. Good afternoon and welcome into 9 News Watch on this Tuesday afternoon. I'm 9 News anchor Alexandra Lewis. Thank you for taking the time to join us in this conversation. Tonight we're airing a story at 9 and 10 about a man, a figure that may or may not be familiar to you. His name is Terrance Roberts. He's an anti-gang, anti-violence activist who found himself in the headlines for a couple of years after he was facing attempted murder charges for shooting and paralyzing a former gang or a gang member at a peace rally that he organized. Stranger than fiction, if you will, and it's why it gripped headlines for so long. But this happened back in 2013, and 8 years later, it yet again is in the headlines. And a huge reason is due to a critically acclaimed, nationally reviewed book called The Holly. 5 shots, 1 gun, and the struggle to save an American neighborhood, written by Julian Rubinstein. And so Julian is joining us now just to give us some context to what is a truly complicated story and a complicated, once local hero, if you will, at the heart of this story. So Julian, first of all, thank you for being here and taking the time. You're
Thanks,
from Denver,
Alexander.
and this is your home. And I'm just curious as to why this topic, Northeast Park Hill gang activity, Terrance Roberts, what drew you to spend, over 7 years of your life dedicating yourself to learning everything you can about this? What drew you to the topic in the first place?
Well, so like you said, I grew up in Denver. I was actually living in New York at the time, working as a
Mhm.
journalist. Always wanted to do a story in Denver and hadn't found one. And I read about this shooting in the New York Times. And just hearing you talk about it, I was thinking, yeah, because I've been asked all the time, of course, well, what kind of these kinds of questions? And the part of it is that, like, first I was drawn to the story, and then I realized that in order to do this story, there was no way to do it like as a even a magazine story, which I'd done many of. And basically the next step was a book. I had written one other book, and I thought, you know what, this is really a book and or a documentary, which we've just finished and are about to be bringing out. So it was the story was so complex and so fascinating, and told a story of a much bigger story, and a story that actually now is much more in the headlines and in the news than it was even in 2013 and 14 when I started working on it. That was pre Michael Brown, pre George Floyd, but all of the stuff that we have been hearing in the news about policing and about structural racism, you can really sort of see through the story, the remarkable story of this neighborhood and of Terrance and his family, who were a big part of it.
Let's talk about the neighborhood because in the book, which is gripping, and I really enjoyed reading it, as so many people in our newsroom did. Um, you call this sector of society in Denver the invisible Denver. Why is it that people don't even know that this part of Denver exists and gang activity is still as prevalent as it is today in 2021? And I think that just kind of goes over a lot of people's heads. You live in your own little bubble and you don't know this invisible world is even out there.
I mean, I think that actually has to do to some degree with the structural issues that we're dealing with. Why is it that communities where, such as this one, for example, where a lot of the city's violence happens in this Northeast sector, same thing in other similar communities across the country, we know that, but yet all we sort of really see are the brief headlines or sort of just scant details about something, but we really don't understand or see what's actually going on there. The fault is on all of us in a way. I mean, it's something that is needs, I think, a light shined on to in a bigger way. But it is fascinating that, for example, this community, going all the way back to the civil rights movement, was, the recipient of federal grants for social services, and it was also has been the site of significant efforts by law enforcement over the decades, including undercover efforts, of course, to eliminate gang violence and gang activity. And yet it hasn't slowed. It's in fact, continues to rise and be a more significant problem. So it's, the reason why it's invisible is sort of complicated, but the fact that it exists it shows that I think it's something that needs to be better understood.
I want to talk a little bit specifically about Terrance. And I was, after reading your book and going, doing my own research, I sat down with probably a dozen different people. And it's so interesting that I can say I could probably split the 12 or so people I met down the middle. Those who, view Terrance and his contributions to society as this incredible thing that pushed us forward, specifically the Black community. And then there are folks who think to this day that this man is a menace. Why do you think Terrance is so polarizing in that way?
I mean, I think one of the reasons is that, well, two main reasons I'd say this is a guy who's a total insider. He's been through the system, through the worst of everything, come out on the other side, and so he is an insider. And in fact, would say that you could characterize him as a whistleblower type, except without any of the actual protections of an actual whistleblower. This is a guy who, I mean, some of the things he says I cannot verify, and others that I could through all the reporting I did, of course, are in the story, and they're pretty alarming. But the fact that he is speaking truth to power, I think, is one of the reasons that a lot of powerful people, including a lot of people who are well connected in the media and other large entities and have a disproportionately larger voice, are able to really criticize him in ways that the pretty significant numbers of people who recognize what he's saying is important. A lot of it's true, and that he has made massive contributions to the community. Those people's voices are not equal in this sort of city and just in the world we live in. So I think that those are some of the reasons. I mean, he's controversial because he's talking about things that are dangerous and that are problematic, and that involve powerful people, dangerous people. And I encountered it myself. I mean, it's not only a complicated story, but it's a dangerous one. And Terrance has been a fearless person who, I mean, to a fault, and I mean literally, he won't back down, and that's just his personality. It's also something that he offers, which offers actually some benefit to us to try to gain what we can from his fearlessness.
And to say that he won't back down, you'll actually, for our viewers who are going to tune in and see the story tonight at 9 and 10, you'll see some of that. We took Terrance back to the Holly, back to this location where the infamous shooting happened back in 2013, and he was confronted by former gang members, and this whole thing plays out. And it's kind of one of these things where we've talked about this gray area in your book, I mean, all of the research you did, and there's still so many question marks, if you will. Final question for you as we wrap this up: if you want people to go in, as we do with every story, having an open mind and just getting the facts and then making their own determination, what would you hope that people get out of not only reading your book, watching this story tonight, re-immersing themselves in this headline gripping news? What's the takeaway?
I mean, one thing is, not yet having seen the piece, I'm very anxious to see it myself and
Yeah.
wondering. I mean, there's a lot, there's a lot. I've seen a couple of the promos, and it's so I partly hope, of course, it would be great. I think if people do read the book, partly to understand, because we were talking about it the other day. I mean, it's hard, of course, TV news, and I'm glad you're getting to do however long you can go with it, but still you have limits on your time. And I was in a position where I took 7 years on this thing, and a lot of time to really try to construct and contextualize what's going on. I know that some of the people that confronted Terrance were about shooting this guy are people that he has major issues going all the way back, and in fact believes that some of them were involved with what happened to him. This is all in the book. I won't do a spoiler alert or anything and all that, but so to kind of understand that there is a context for all this, and then to really, I think, a takeaway is to really try to think about the sort of the structures and the systems that kind of run the city, and how much power they have compared to sometimes what we can learn and see from a deep dive independently done. And I've had to go through my own threats and things after doing this because of the work I did. I'm not Terrance. I don't speak for Terrance. He doesn't always agree with me, nor I him. I try to do an independent work, and I think that it does. His story is one that that lends itself to that, to because it can, I think, make you think about things in another way. As you mentioned, it's super complicated. My own book can't tie up all the loose ends. In fact, it's kind of like real life. There's a lot of gray area about what happened, but there's also a lot we can learn from what happened. And so I'm glad you're doing a story on it.
Well, certainly a 5 minute story isn't going to answer all of the questions, but we really did, do our best to kind of lay it out there and let viewers kind of make their own determination. And hopefully it will encourage people to do some more research, maybe pick up your book, look into the history of this sector of Denver, which has so much culture and history, but a lot of sadness and violence attached to it as well. But certainly a part of our community that is so colorful and beautiful. And this is just one story, like you said, I think that represents so many others. So, Julian, thank you for taking the time. From one journalist to the next, I really enjoyed reading your book, and it really was the catalyst to even start this conversation, which I think is a necessary one, to not forget about these communities and the things they're going through, because we may not know about them or we don't want to listen to those headlines anymore. It doesn't mean that it's still not important, and we still need to be discussing it and looking at the deeper nuances of what's happening to the people and the structures of the families in this community. So thank you for taking the time. I hope you and everybody else out there will take the time to watch the story with an open mind tonight at 9 and 10, and then there will be a second part tomorrow, which kind of delves into the broader sense of what gang activity is doing to communities in Denver. Julian, thank you. Everyone out there watching, thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Julian, and let's keep this conversation going. I hope what happens tonight with this story and tomorrow is not the end of this necessary conversation. So thank you guys. Reach out, and we'll see you later. Bye bye.
Thanks, Alexander.